I didn't feel joyful, I was scared, I was afraid. And it wasn't anxiety, they were like panic attacks.
Yeah.
For over 50 years, Goldie Hawn was Hollywood's golden glow, the woman everyone called pure sunshine. The one who laughed when others lost it, who smiled when the world cracked, and who turned lightness into her shield on screen. She made joy look effortless, almost contagious. But behind that sparkle, a storm was brewing. Fear would hit out of nowhere, panic would choke her breath, and her mind would replay every slight she ever faced. Now at 79, Goldie Hawn isn't protecting anyone's comfort anymore. She's finally letting the truth she carried in silence step into the spotlight. Behind that world-famous grin, Goldie's biggest secret was that her happiness wasn't easy, not even close. She said the biggest lie about her career was that joy just came naturally.
We're companions, and we're a couple.
Yeah, there's only one thing we're not.
What?
Married.
Later, she confessed she wasn't floating on happiness at all. She was fighting to stay afloat every single day. She was terrified, trying to figure out why her own body and mind were turning against her. But Hollywood had no space for a woman's fear, not when it came wrapped in beauty and fame. It wanted her shiny, sweet, and smiling on cue. Always agreeable, always quiet. By the late 70s, Goldie was a force, an Oscar winner, a box office magnet, and the poster girl for America's sweetheart dream. But that image? It turned into a cage. Men with power read her warmth as weakness, her comedy as cluelessness, and her positivity as proof she wasn't sharp enough to fight back. The industry's rule was crystal clear: women who swallowed disrespect got rewarded, and women who stood up for themselves paid the price. Goldie saw the game early, and she made her own rules. She didn't explode on set or go running to the tabloids. No, she played it cold and smart. She stayed calm, said nothing, and kept her receipts in her mind. No messy headlines, no public drama, just a quiet blacklist of men who crossed the line and never got a second chance. It wasn't about revenge, it was about control. Goldie chose peace over prestige every time. Some of those men were co-stars who switched up the second the cameras stopped rolling. Others tried the fake charm act, then went ice cold when she didn't play along. When she didn't give them what they wanted, a few straight up dismissed her, reducing years of hard-earned respect to a cheap punchline. Every experience carved the same truth deeper into her soul. Goldie realized that protecting her peace mattered more than pleasing anyone. This wasn't about holding grudges. It was about survival with grace and grit. As panic attacks kept haunting her through the years, she became fiercely guarded over her emotional space. No more chasing approval, she started choosing distance and calm instead. That one decision quietly flipped her whole career. And the first man who pushed her to draw that unbreakable line did it on a set that looked cheerful from the outside. A comedy so bright, it hid the tension brewing beneath. When Foul Play hit theaters, fans saw playful chemistry and effortless laughs between Goldie Hawn and Chevy Chase. But behind the camera, things were nothing like they seemed. What the audience saw as smooth and easy fun was chaos in disguise. Chevy came in carrying a big TV reputation and even bigger ego energy. On set, that charm turned sharp fast. Crew members later claimed he treated the whole production like his personal playground. He'd improvise whenever he wanted, skip takes he didn't feel like doing, and shrug off direction with a smug grin. And when the director dared to push back, Chevy would undermine him right there in front of everyone. Goldie, ever the pro, tried to keep things calm. She cracked jokes, lightened the air, and stayed composed. But each time she landed a joke and got the laugh, his attitude would flip in seconds. His mood darkened like a switch had been hit. He pouted through scenes, muttering little insults under his breath, and kept pushing for rewrites just to steal the spotlight back. Crew members remembered him snapping at techs, mocking the dialogue, and even questioning Goldie's comedy skills like she hadn't already owned Hollywood a dozen times over. At one point, he reportedly sneered that she was lucky just to be near him. But the sting wasn't in the words, it was in the arrogance behind them. Goldie later told close friends she'd never felt so disrespected by a co-star. The whole set grew tense and heavy, everyone walking on eggshells just to make it through another take. One makeup artist even said the crew was literally counting the hours until wrap, praying the day would end without another meltdown. Meanwhile, Chevy acted totally unbothered, either oblivious or quietly entertained by the chaos he'd stirred. Goldie didn't snap back, didn't throw shade, and definitely didn't go public. She chose a colder kind of response, silence with memory. From that moment on, his name was etched onto a mental list she never erased. By the time the final scene wrapped, the atmosphere was pure frost. They barely spoke, barely looked at each other, two stars pretending the other didn't exist. Studios tried to milk their chemistry, waving sequel deals, fat checks, and promises of influence in front of her like bait. But Goldie wasn't having it. She shut it down instantly, told her agent just 2 words. Not interested. No drama, no explanation, just a clean, powerful no. It was like a wall slamming down, firm, final, and unshakable. That silence wasn't weakness. It was power in its purest form. From that moment on, there were no cozy reunion talks, no nostalgia-filled interviews, no fake smiles for the cameras. Chevy Chase was wiped clean from Goldie's professional world, no slow fade, no second act, just gone. And he never managed to find his way back in. But the next name on Goldie's private list didn't come from on-set chaos. It began with rejection. Quiet, controlled rejection that turned into something far colder and more strategic. By the time she crossed paths with Warren Beatty, Goldie already knew exactly how Hollywood's power web worked. Beatty wasn't just another star, he was a gatekeeper, one of those rare insiders whose influence stretched beyond casting calls into reputations, access, and long-term survival in the business. When he turned his attention toward Goldie in the late 70s, the pattern was all too familiar. There were dinner invites that seemed innocent, private gatherings filled with big names, and those curated Hollywood nights where opportunities floated through the air, but the expectations behind them were quietly understood by everyone. Goldie saw the strings instantly and wanted no part of it. She declined with grace, politely, firmly, again and again. No drama, no public confrontation, just a clean refusal to play along. But according to those close to her, that single choice flipped everything. The charm vanished almost overnight. What replaced it wasn't warmth or friendship. It was ice, silence, and a quiet reminder of how fast Hollywood's smiles could turn sharp. The payback came quiet, subtle, sneaky, and calculated. Scripts she'd been promised suddenly vanished without a word. Meetings were postponed, but never rescheduled. Producers who once sounded thrilled went cold in pride.
And I will tell you, you know how sometimes you forget why you fall in love? I remembered everything and why I fell in love.
Different rapping. Goldie knew exactly what was happening. It wasn't feedback, it was punishment wearing a professional mask. Still, she didn't snap, didn't plead, didn't chase anyone down. That was the twisted beauty of the game, nothing ever said out loud, no proof, just a quiet wall of silence closing in. Warren Beatty didn't need to go public to hurt her reputation. He let suspicion do the work for him. Those so-called concerns were whispered in the right rooms, phrased as friendly advice or insider opinion, and just like that, seeds of doubt began to grow. Goldie saw the tactic immediately. If he couldn't have her, he'd try to shrink her, and for a while, it worked. The early 80s brought a strange pattern roles that should have been hers slipped away. Promising conversations fizzled out, and opportunities evaporated overnight. Nothing explosive, nothing traceable, just doors closing one by one, softly but deliberately. It was like watching her own light dim for reasons that made no sense on paper. But Goldie wasn't naive. She'd seen Hollywood play this game before. She didn't waste time fighting ghosts. Instead, she made a bold pivot. She stopped chasing approval and prestige tied to men like him, choosing instead to create her own lane, working on projects she could shape with people she trusted behind the scenes. Eventually, Goldie stopped sugarcoating it. She summed Warren Beatty up in one sharp line: a man who couldn't handle rejection and made others pay for it. That single sentence became shorthand for everything she'd been put through during those brutal years. Then, years later, at a huge Hollywood Awards event, Beatty tried to waltz right back into her space, same smooth grin, same nostalgic charm, same assumption that time had wiped the slate clean. But Goldie wasn't playing that game. She smiled, cool and collected, then mid-sentence, turned and walked away. Witnesses said the air went icy, a clean, unmistakable full stop. It wasn't rage, it was finality. That door had been locked for years, and the key, long gone. But the next name on her private list didn't play in the shadows. This one embarrassed her right out in the open. It happened in a room built to measure power Dustin Hoffman and the audition that shattered her trust. Goldie Hawn walked into that casting session knowing she earned her place there. She wasn't chasing validation. She was expanding her reach. The role was serious, the kind critics drool over, and she came in calm, sharp, and prepared to deliver something new. Hoffman, already attached to the project, had a rep for being intense, hiding his control behind the word method. But what unfolded wasn't collaboration, it was domination. Mid-scene, he abruptly cut her off, freezing the energy in the room. Then, turning to the producers, he smirked and dismissed her work as sitcom level. It was a public sting, the kind that left a permanent scar under all the Hollywood polish. A nervous laugh rippled through the room, the kind that says no one knows if they should laugh or hold their breath. Goldie knew instantly what was happening. This wasn't direction, it was humiliation, sharp, public, and calculated. Hoffman wasn't building chemistry, he was claiming control. Still, Goldie kept her composure, finished her scene with quiet power, thanked everyone, and walked out with her head held high. By the next morning, she was done. She pulled herself out of the project completely. Insiders said the team scrambled to spin it, calling it a creative misunderstanding or moment of artistic tension. But Goldie didn't buy any of it. She declined every call, every offer to smooth things over. What stuck with her wasn't losing the role, it was that split second of self-doubt he managed to spark. Later, she admitted that tiny flicker of uncertainty shook her more than any insult he threw. So, she did what she always did, learned, adapted, and adjusted her course. From that point on, she chose control over compliance every single time. Hoffman hadn't exposed a weakness in her talent, he'd aimed straight for her confidence. And Goldie saw the move for what it was, another tired trick from men who feel small and try to feel bigger by shrinking the women around them. Years later, she reflected publicly, saying that too many men in Hollywood forget something vital. They're not directing the women around them. People who knew her didn't need names to fill in the blanks. They knew exactly who she was referring to. She never worked with Dustin Hoffman again. No statement, no explanation, no PR cleanup, her silence was the message, and it said everything that needed to be said. After that experience, Goldie drew her boundaries tighter than ever, lines no one was crossing again. But even she couldn't have predicted the next storm coming her way, a clash wrapped in chaos, comedy, and so-called brilliance. This time, the trouble came with a new face: Bill Murray. He entered Goldie's orbit during early talks for a big studio comedy, and from the first minute, the imbalance was crystal clear. He strolled in late, no apology, and dropped his coffee right on top of the script like the work didn't even matter. When the table read started, he completely derailed it, mocking lines, interrupting cues, and turning every scene into his own personal improv show. The room froze, writers stared, unsure what to do. Goldie tried to adapt, to keep things steady, but the vibe was off, messy, arrogant, and flat-out disrespectful. Then came the moment that changed everything. In front of the entire room, Murray looked right at her and questioned her ability to handle dramatic roles, tossing it out with a smug grin, clearly fishing for laughs. A few people chuckled nervously. Goldie didn't. She calmly closed her script, stood up, and walked out. No yelling, no scene, just a clean exit that spoke louder than words. By the next day, her team made it official she was out. No drama, no leaks, no back and forth. Later, when asked about it, Goldie summed him up with one sharp word: exhausting. Not brilliant, not misunderstood, just plain exhausting. That moment rewired how she chose her work. From then on, she refused to deal with men who mistook chaos for charm or disrespect for creativity, walking away from entire projects rather than babysit another ego in disguise. If Bill Murray masked his cruelty with charm, Sean Penn didn't bother hiding his, he wore it like armor. It all went down at a high-profile charity gala centered on mental health, a cause that meant everything to Goldie. She delivered a heartfelt speech filled with honesty, real experience, and vulnerability. But while the room leaned in, Penn, seated just a few feet away, made his disdain loud without saying much at all, rolling his eyes, muttering comments under his breath, dismissing her words like they were fluff. When the applause ended, he went even lower, turning her entire career into a punchline, sneering that she should stick to giggling. Goldie didn't take the bait. She smiled politely, thanked the hosts, and left early. But behind the calm exit, she was deeply shaken, not out of ego, but because something personal, raw, and meaningful had just been mocked in a space meant for empathy. Later, she admitted that even after decades of proving herself, men like him still tried to shrink her down to a stereotype. From that night on, she made one quiet rule: if Penn was in the room, she wouldn't be. When asked about him later, her answer was simple and sharp: not my energy. No drama, no debate, just boundaries. But there was still one name left on Goldie's private list, one that cut far deeper than the rest: Kirk Douglas. He wasn't a volatile co-star, a rejected admirer, or someone desperate to stay relevant. He was a legend, the face of old Hollywood power, authority, and unshakable control. And that's what made his impact last so long. Goldie entered rooms with Douglas fully aware of his stature. She respected history and knew the industry had been built by men like him, but respect didn't always go both ways. At public events, Douglas would greet her with overblown charm, lingering hand kisses, exaggerated winks, and comments about her looks that were framed as compliments, but landed like reminders of who still held the power. On the surface, it all looked harmless, even flattering. But to Goldie, it felt suffocating, invasive, and dismissive of everything she had fought to earn. The weight of Kirk Douglas's legendary status didn't excuse the behavior, and that realization stuck with her long after the applause faded. The message underneath it all couldn't have been clearer. She was being seen, but never heard. As the panel talk shifted toward craft, legacy, and creative authority, the imbalance grew louder even though no one raised their voice. Douglas kept cutting her off mid-thought, finishing her sentences, correcting her word choices, and twisting her insights into his own, as if her ideas only mattered once they came out of his mouth. Each time Goldie tried to step into the spotlight, the attention was pulled right back to him. Moderators noticed it. The audience noticed it. And Goldie felt it deep in her gut. Later, she told a close friend it was like being reduced to background decor there for the atmosphere, not the conversation. What made it sting worse was how quiet the disrespect was. There wasn't one cruel line she could call out, no single insult to quote just a string of small cuts that built up until it bled. Death by 1,000 polite dismissals. Introductions that labeled men as visionaries while calling her adorable. Compliments that doubled as jokes. Laughter that hit a little too perfectly at her expense. And beneath it all, that silent, exhausting assumption that her success came from her looks, not her hard-earned skill. Goldie once said you could be first on the call sheet and still feel invisible when working with Kirk Douglas, and that invisibility followed her long after the cameras stopped rolling. Behind closed doors, it never let up. She later confided to friends that Douglas spoke to her like she was frozen in time, still the bubbly blonde from her early comedies, as if the Oscar, the producing credits, and the decades of hard-earned respect didn't exist. She didn't call it cruelty, she called it conditioning, a mindset built in an era where women were valued for presence, not perspective. To Goldie, that kind of old-school thinking was its own brand of disrespect, polished up to look polite. One producer even recalled a roundtable where Douglas interrupted her 3 times in under 5 minutes. But Goldie didn't raise her voice or fight to prove a point, she played it her way. She sat quietly, listened, and then stood up with calm precision. "I've said everything I needed to say," she told the room and walked out. No shouting, no drama, just silence so heavy it swallowed the space whole. That moment summed her up perfectly. She didn't clash, she closed the door. Goldie never publicly criticized Kirk Douglas. She didn't need to. She simply erased him from her emotional world, leaving the silence to speak for itself. At the same time, she went out of her way to praise Michael Douglas, often calling him thoughtful and respectful, a contrast that said everything without saying a word. To anyone paying attention, Kirk Douglas became more than just a Hollywood icon in her story. He became a symbol of everything she refused to carry forward. The belief that legacy excuses dismissal, that's what Goldie refused to accept. Years later, she summed it up with quiet power, saying, "Some men don't deserve a second act in your memory." That wasn't bitterness, that was clarity. And that clarity, after a lifetime of being underestimated behind a bright, unbreakable smile, became Goldie Hawn's greatest act of self-preservation. For decades, Goldie protected that sunshine image, a smile that masked fear, panic, and steel-strong resolve. Every laugh, every gentle word was a layer of armor. Those men who underestimated her never thought she'd remember, but she did. And now, the truth behind that golden glow finally shines through. So here's the question: which name on her hidden list shocked you the most? Do you think Goldie's silence was her greatest strength, or the price she paid to keep her peace? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about it. If this story hit deep, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold Hollywood truths, iconic comebacks, and stories that flip the spotlight where it truly belongs. And hey, turn on the notifications so you never miss what's coming next.